Hey, and welcome into Game Day Scoreboard. Kiana Martin here with you as we kick off your final week before the holiday chaos. But hey, speaking of chaos, plenty of shakeups across the NFL to several playoff-bound squads who will be looking at ways to recover or at least hang on until January. Well, the bad news just keeps on coming for the Detroit Lions. Monday, we learned that running back David Montgomery is headed for season-ending surgery. After injuring his knee in Sunday's loss to the Bills, Lions coach Dan Campbell took the news pretty hard. Take a listen.
He's just the ultimate teammate, ultimate competitor. You know, we're going to miss him, man. He's another one of these guys that got us to this position, helped get us to where we're at. And man, the rest of us, we owe him. We owe him to keep going and make sure that wasn't in vain.
Well, here's a look at some other notable storylines across the NFL on Monday. Patrick Mahomes diagnosed with a mild high ankle sprain considered week to week. Mike Tomlin's optimistic about TJ Watt's availability against the Ravens after his ankle injury. Deontay Johnson and the Ravens mutually agreed to excusal from team activities this week. Devontae Campbell suspended for the rest of the regular season by the 49ers. We're now joined by CBS Sports NFL analyst Tyler Sullivan. And Tyler, injury bug really starting to hit the Lions at a very crucial part of their season. They had already taken a big hit on the defensive side with Aiden Hutchinson, now taking a big hit on offense with David Montgomery. Just, are these mounting injuries maybe too much of a hindrance for their Super Bowl hopes?
Yeah, you went into the season extremely optimistic, right? Like, okay, this is it. This is going to be the Lions' year. And now you're like, okay, 1 week, one player goes down. Another week, 3 players go down. And you're like, oh boy, can they withstand all of this? And we're really starting to have some concerns now because not only are these injuries happening, but they're happening right at the end of the season. We only have 3 weeks left now. So we're really knocking on the door of the playoffs. And specifically with David Montgomery, I just feel like this one could end up being a fatal blow. Not because they don't have anybody there, because of course they have Jahmyr Gibbs, right? Like a perfect plug-and-play type of player. We've been calling them Sonic and Knuckles all year. They have somebody that can legitimately still be an impact out of the backfield. The question for me now is, though, how impactful is Jahmyr Gibbs going to be now that he's taking on this entire workload? The Lions have done a great job this year, basically splitting it 50-50 in the backfield. And to varying degrees of efficiency, Gibbs has been the more efficient player, but certainly David Montgomery has been more than impactful in this backfield. And now that it's just going to be Gibbs, I wonder if all of a sudden he's going to just dip a little bit. And if he dips just a little bit, does that hurt the offense as a whole and then allows them to then have to rely on this banged up defense, as you mentioned, because they can't extend drives? So there's a domino effect here going on with Detroit that I'm a little bit concerned about.
Yeah, that domino effect, certainly something worth noting. And you got to think about it. It was just a week ago they were almost signing guys off of the streets for that banged up defense you talked about. Now dealing with the effects on the offensive side. We'll see how they bounce back. But let's go from Super Bowl favorites to basement dwellers, because after rough offensive performances in Week 15, Titans quarterback Will Levis and Browns quarterback Jameis Winston both benched for backups Mason Rudolph and Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Now, both coaches just undecided on who they will turn to for Week 16. But Tyler, what direction do you expect these teams to head in their QB search? And let's start this off with the Titans side of the things.
Yeah, I think both of these teams are going to be dealing with some sort of quarterback controversy going into next season. I think Tennessee Titans probably a little bit easier to kind of navigate because we're looking at them saying, okay, they drafted Will Levis a couple of years ago in the 2nd round. It doesn't feel like it's working out. Obviously, benched last week, 3 interceptions. You say, okay, they've tried it. It feels like it's going to run its course. They're in line for possibly a top 5, certainly a top 10 pick at the NFL draft. They're going to be in the running and in the conversation to go after a quarterback at the draft. That feels like something that the Tennessee Titans, still a young team, is, a young head coach, 1st-year head coach. That feels like the path for them. You move on from Will Levis, whether he's your backup or maybe you trade him or something along those lines. But to me, they're going to have a different quarterback in 2025. The question for me, though, as we now pivot to the Cleveland Browns, is we all knew that Jameis Winston wasn't going to be the guy over the long term. It was the same thing we saw with Joe Flacco a year ago. Deshaun Watson is still a part of this organization, and you really can't get out from under that contract. And 2025, you're looking at a dead cap hit of like $170 some odd million. It goes just under $100 million in 2026. And just to, give you an easy translation, that means they can't get rid of Deshaun Watson. So you still have this lingering problem at quarterback for the Cleveland Browns because of the Deshaun Watson contract. Sure, you could bring in a young rookie and see if something like that happens. Like I mentioned with Tennessee, Cleveland could be in line for a top 10 pick as well. So both of these teams are going to be in the quarterback market, I believe, to try to find young, cheap talent. I just think it's a little bit easier for Tennessee to bring that guy in right away.
Yeah, plenty of decisions, especially for these two franchises, will be made. These decisions over the next several weeks, months, may be it. But not the only notable practice-related drama in the NFL this week. Ravens wide receiver Diontae Johnson and the team mutually agreeing to excuse him from team activities during their bye week. Here's what head coach John Harbaugh had to say about the decision. At this time, I'm going to have to wait just to clarify it. There's some moving parts there that we're going to have to figure out and explore and just see where we're at. I know that's not the answer you want, but that's the best I can do in fairness to everybody. We'll just work it out, and we'll see where we're at over the next few days this week. Tyler, Deontay Johnson went from coveted trade deadline acquisition for a Ravens team in need of an extra wideout to a weekly nuisance for a team trying to focus on their playoff push. Just how should the Ravens handle this situation moving forward?
This is one of the more bizarre storylines of this season for me because, like you referenced, when they acquired him, you're like, oh boy, okay, here we go. Lamar really loading up. You have Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman was coming on. So was Mark Andrews, and now you're bringing in Diontae Johnson. You're like, okay, here we go. Let's go Baltimore. You have Derrick Henry in that backfield. This team looks like it's ready to go on a Super Bowl run, and they're just loading up. And this has been a total non-factor. And it's not even the fact that Deontay Johnson hasn't been playing well. He hasn't been playing. You talk about being excused this week from practices. We're coming off a week where he was suspended by the team because at one point he refused to go into the game when asked. So it just feels like something is weird here. So, square peg, round hole doesn't seem to be a fit clearly with the Ravens. Now, I don't think that this is anything that will determine the AFC playoff picture or anything along those lines, because we saw the other day, Rashad Bateman still looks like a really good wide receiver for Lamar Jackson. We know what Zay Flowers can do. Mark Andrews, of course, Derrick Henry. Lamar Jackson threw 5 touchdowns the other day. So it's not like this offense is lacking for pass catchers, but this is one of those questions to say, okay, if you knew that this was going to be the road that you went with Diontae Johnson, maybe you could have pivoted to another wide receiver, and maybe we're looking at a completely loaded offense like we thought we were getting with Diontae Johnson coming into the fold. So it feels like kind of a flop trade here, but overall, I think Baltimore is still going to be very dangerous come the postseason.
Tyler, I feel like the NFL is giving us more drama than your Housewives series, because now from one situation to another, Devondre Campbell, and even deeper trouble with the 49ers after leaving Thursday's game early against the Rams. 49ers handing down a 3-game suspension to the veteran linebacker that puts an end to his regular season. So here's the official statement from 49ers GM John Lynch. We have suspended Devondre Campbell Sr. for 3 games due to conduct detrimental to the team. We will have no further comment on this matter, end quote. Well, Tyler, Campbell dug himself obviously into a deep hole amongst his teammates after his actions in Thursday's loss. We've heard teammates speaking in the locker room about this all week long, but is there any way for him to rectify this situation with this team and even taking this a step further with the league as a whole at this point?
Yeah, I think the league as a whole is really going to be interesting. I think the ship has sailed with San Francisco. You heard the comments coming off of that game when he refused to go in. George Kittle's one that comes to mind, saying he would never want to play for somebody like someone who does like that again. So when you have those type of not venomous but very definitive type of statements from your team leaders, from your team captains, it just feels almost impossible for him to come back in San Francisco. Now, when we're talking about his future as a whole in the NFL, he's going to have to explain explain himself when he gets into these free agent meetings with these prospective teams this offseason. Like, there's going to be a lot of explaining that he's going to need to do, because this is a cardinal sin in the NFL. You do not dress and then refuse to go into the game. We were just talking about it with Diontae Johnson and the situation that's going on in Baltimore. You don't do that to players who are putting their bodies on the line, a full weeks of practice. You could have had another player dress for that game and maybe help that team out. So overall, it just feels like a really odd situation for Campbell. And from a San Francisco perspective, this is the right move. You know, this is one of those things where it hasn't gone right for San Francisco this season. The injuries have piled up. You're under 500. You're last place in the division. You're not out of the playoffs mathematically yet, but it does feel like you're behind the 8 ball there. You don't then all of a sudden, if you're Kyle Shanahan, want to start introducing locker room dysfunction by allowing that player to then come back to the team. And if you're one of those leaders, you're one of those players on the roster, you're saying, okay, why are we forgiving this player? What am I doing? You know, why am I sacrificing myself to be on the field? And then this guy gets a free pass. So this is one of those situations where it impacts this team beyond 2024 and keeps that locker room tight.
Just my time spending working under Kyle Shanahan. He is a no-nonsense guy. We have seen even those top guys, I'm talking about like a Brandon Ayuk, maybe having not his best practices and being like, okay, well, I'm going to sit you then. He has no problem saying goodbye to a guy if things aren't going right and not team positive, let's put it that way. But also a big slap in the face for San Francisco, just considering at that point want them to go in. They're already fighting for their playoff lives. So, Tyler, thanks so much for stopping by. We appreciate that insight. CBS has a monster slate of games on tap for Week 16, and we'll have you covered for all of them with post-game highlights, recaps, on-field interviews, and much more right here on CBS Sports HQ. Watch live on the CBS Sports app or stream it on Paramount+.